Hey, so imagine you're setting up a small server rack in a basement office, and you've just bought a handful of devices, maybe a couple of NAS drives, a mini PC, a PoE switch, and a UPS. You've got all the cables fanned out, and you're staring at that rack and wondering, do I really need a fancy power strip, or can I just plug everything into the wall? That's the exact moment I was in last month, and it's the kind of hesitation that makes you want to do a little more digging before you splash out on a piece of equipment you might never use. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. In this video I'm going to walk through the CyberPower PDU81009, a switched, Metered-by-Outlet power distribution unit, and help you decide whether it's the right fit for a modest server or networking rig, or if you'd be better off with a simpler solution. First off, the biggest thing about a PDU like this is the ability to actually turn individual outlets on and off, and to see how much power each device is pulling. When you have, say, a backup drive that you only need during nightly backups, being able to cut power to it during the day can shave a few dollars off your electricity bill and reduce heat inside the rack. The PDU81009 gives you 10 front-mounted IEC 320C13 outlets, all of which can be switched remotely or locally, and each outlet reports its own meter reading. That level of granularity is handy if you're trying to keep your rack under a certain amperage ceiling. The unit itself is rated for 200240V at 30A, but it's derated to 24A to stay within safe operating limits. In practice, that means you have a little headroom to plug a couple of mid-range servers, a switch, and a UPS without tripping the internal breaker. Now, who actually benefits from this kind of feature set? Small to medium businesses that run a handful of servers, home lab enthusiasts, and IT professionals who need remote management will find the built-in monitoring a real time saver. If you're already using something like a network-managed PDUs or a smart UPS that can give you power data, the extra cost of a metered unit starts to make sense. On the flip side, if you're only powering a single desktop or a couple of routers, a plain vanilla power strip will do just fine, and you'll be paying for features you'll never use. Let's talk about the practical strengths that have stood out in real-world use. The most noticeable is the remote control capability. The PDU connects to your network and supports simple web-based management, so you can log in from anywhere on your LAN and toggle outlets without having to crawl into the rack. I've used this to reboot a stubborn PoE switch at 3am. I just clicked the off button on the outlet, waited a few seconds, and turned it back on, all from my laptop. No more hunting for the correct power cable or pulling the rack door open in the middle of the night. The per-outlet metering also gives you a clear picture of which devices are the biggest power hogs. In one test setup, the NAS accounted for about 35% of total draw, the UPS itself took another 20%, and the rest was split among a small server and networking gear. Knowing that, I could rearrange the load and keep the PDU's overall draw under the 24A derated limit, which is something you can't do with a normal strip. Another strong point is the rugged 2U Rackmount form factor. The PDU slides right into a standard 19-inch rack, and the front panel design means the outlets are easily accessible when you need to plug or unplug a server. The build feels solid. The metal housing is thick enough to survive a few bumps, and the heat vents keep the internal electronics from getting too hot, which is a subtle but important detail for devices that sit in a confined space 24 hours a day. Every product has trade-offs, and this unit is no exception. One practical weakness is the lack of USB or SNMP integration for more advanced monitoring platforms. If you've got a centralized monitoring system that expects to pull power data via SNMP, you'll need to rely on the web interface or possibly a third-party script that scrapes the data, which adds a layer of complexity. For many small setups that isn't a deal-breaker, but larger environments might find it limiting. Also, while the 10 outlets sound generous, the fact that they're all IEC 320C13 means you're limited to devices that use that specific plug type. If your rack contains a lot of equipment with NEMA 515 or 520 plugs, you'll need adapters, which adds clutter and potential points of failure. Finally, the price point is higher than a typical strip. You're paying for the switching and metering, and that cost only pays off if you actually use those features. In a purely plug-and-play scenario, you might end up overpaying. So, who should walk away from this review? If your setup is basically a few home entertainment,